Welcome to History Beyond Sleep, where we uncover the secrets the textbooks tried to hide.
In the vast tapestry of history, woven with names of conquerors and kings, there are threads that seem to vanish, not fray, not fade, but disappear, as if someone somewhere chose silence over truth, and the world agreed. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture a great library, its shelves sagging under the weight of dynasties, doctrines, and forgotten dreams. Now imagine a scroll, crisp and ancient, with a single line blacked out, a name missing, a page left deliberately blank, where a rain once burned bright. This is where our story begins. Not with a birth or a coronation, not with battles or banners, but with an absence. A soft, intentional void. History is not simply what happened. It is what was remembered. And what is remembered depends on who is allowed to write it. Some names echo across centuries. Caesar, Charlemagne, Genghis. They rode into memory on horses and heralds, but others, powerful, transformative, were quietly swept beneath the current. One of them, perhaps the most astonishing of all, was a woman who ruled an empire not as queen or empress, but as emperor. Her name should be among the immortals, but instead it has been wrapped in myths, mispronounced, mistranslated, and at times intentionally erased. She lived in a time when power wore a man's face, yet she dared to wear the crown, not beside the throne, but upon it. She issued decrees, reformed systems, led armies, and shaped an empire's destiny. And yet, if you flip through many history books, you will find nothing, or worse, a footnote, a shadow, a cautionary tale. She is the mystery at the center of this story, a ghost in royal robes, a ruler whose reign was real and whose legacy was almost undone by ink. Who was she? Why was she forgotten or made to be forgotten? And who chose silence over memory? As we embark on this gentle journey through time, know that the past is not a fixed place. It breathes. It bends. It listens for those who are willing to hear the voices beneath the noise. So tonight, we trace the edges of a buried legacy. We follow the faint footprints left behind by a woman the world wasn't ready to remember. We will walk softly through corridors of jade and scrolls of silk, through whispers and windstorms, and with each step the silence will begin to crack, because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that almost vanished, and sometimes erasure is the strongest evidence that someone mattered too much. So rest easy. You are not too late. The stars still remember her name, and by the end of this night, so will you. It was not through lineage alone that she came to power, nor through marriage, nor accident, nor gift. She stepped into the space no one believed she should, and ruled it, not as a placeholder, not as a partner, but as the sovereign itself. The ancient empire she would inherit was not unaccustomed to rulers with ambition. It had seen blood-drenched revolutions, dynasties born and broken, and names carved into stone with trembling hands. But it had never seen this. A woman who would sit not behind the throne, not beside it, but upon it. And yet, even as she rose, history turned its face away. The scribes hesitated. The statues blinked. The record-keepers reached for softer explanations. She was regent, they said. She merely advised, they whispered. But in the courts of the time, her word was law. she wielded imperial seals. Her proclamations carried the weight of empire. She restructured institutions, disciplined generals, elevated scholars. She was not waiting for a son to grow old enough. She was not guarding the gates. She was the gate. But power, when it does not match expectation, becomes dangerous in the eyes of the record. And so began a quiet campaign, not of rebellion or revolt, but of narrative. She was crowned in full ritual, draped in robes reserved only for emperors, took titles once spoken only in masculine tones. But the moment the ink dried, the efforts to erase her began. When portraits were commissioned, they softened her face. When scrolls were drafted, they softened her title. And when histories were retold, they softened her into near invisibility. And yet the empire obeyed her, not out of charity, but command. Not because she was a woman of the court, but because she ruled with clarity, boldness, and unflinching resolve. To understand how this was possible, we must step inside her world. A palace surrounded by murmuring courtiers and guarded by tradition. A court where each glance held hidden names, and where the act of sitting on the dragon throne meant confronting centuries of gender and power. Every day she ruled was an act of defiance, not just against the empire's old bones, but against the ink that would one day try to forget her. Still, she did not shrink. She expanded. She rewrote laws, balanced trade, quieted rebellion, restored temples, and above all, kept the empire whole. It is tempting to wonder, did she know her legacy was being undermined even as she built it? Did she walk through the marble halls, past scribes who bowed with their heads but erased with their hands? Perhaps, and yet she ruled anyway. History, like a mountain, resists those who were never meant to climb it. But she did more than climb. She built steps for those who would follow. The irony is cruel and beautiful. The more she succeeded, the more fiercely she was erased. She did not vanish because she failed. She vanished because she prevailed. So tonight, as we rest in the hush of this story, let us honor the quiet force she became, a ruler cloaked in shadows, not of her making, but of the world's discomfort. She claimed the throne in full light. The shadows came later, but we are here now, and we are looking. And perhaps, in our quiet remembering, the throne remembers too. Long before she was a sovereign, before palace corridors echoed her footsteps, before statues whispered her titles, she was simply a child, a girl born not into obscurity, but into a house of noble blood, where ambition swirled like incense and destiny hovered like mist above the cradle. Her birth, though celebrated in ceremony, carried no prophecy of power. In the eyes of those around her, she was a daughter, a future bride, a future mother. Not a future monarch. Yet even as an infant, the stars above her palace glowed with uncommon stillness, and in the courtyard pools where moonlight gathered, she would one day gaze, silent and thoughtful, learning early to watch more than she spoke. Her family was steeped in both intellect and intrigue. Her father, a scholar official of rare integrity. Her mother, refined, private, quietly strategic. From them she absorbed the art of restraint, the ability to move through a room like water, soft, but shaping all it touched. Education was her first rebellion. Where other girls were taught poetry and embroidery, she reached for the classics of governance. She studied history with a sharp, steady hunger, not for dates, but for patterns, not for rulers, but for the rules they broke. She read the stories of emperors who failed and those who rose from ash. She read of war, drought, betrayal, but also of peace forged from impossible beginnings. And somewhere along the way, she realized something most would never dare think. She was no less capable. She was not just a daughter of empire. She could be the empire. As she grew, so too did the empire's unrest. The dynasty into which she was born wore cracks like scars. Corruption leaked through the court. Rebellion stirred in the provinces. And within the palace the old powers circled, guarding their positions with smiles and silence. Into this crumbling order she stepped with quiet poise, still a girl in the world's eyes, but already planning her ascent. Not through force, not yet, but through observation, adaptation. Patience. In the court gardens she would walk alone. Among plum blossoms and ancient pines, she memorized the language of politics, the tilt of a nobleman's brow, the whispered tension between ministers, the balance between truth and performance. She learned that to rule, one must first survive, and to survive, one must first be underestimated. So she allowed herself to be overlooked. She played her role with grace, not out of submission, but as strategy, a performance of compliance to mask the slow sharpening of will. And while the court looked away, she watched. And while the records slept, she dreamed. No prophecy heralded her rise. No comet split the sky at her birth. But there is a quiet kind of power in being overlooked, a stillness that gathers strength just beneath the surface. She was born in silk, yes, but forged in silence. And so tonight, as we rest and remember, know that power often begins not with declarations, but with questions whispered in the dark. Who listens when no one is watching? Who prepares when no one expects? Who dares to imagine a crown when the world has written a different ending? She did. And though they tried to bury the story of her birth, the roots grew anyway, beneath stone, beneath silence, beneath centuries. Waiting for someone like you to find them, she came into a world heavy with history, an empire vast and ancient, stretched thin across mountains and rivers, its borders marked by both beauty and unrest. This was not a kingdom born yesterday, but one built over centuries of ambition, its foundations laid by emperors long since past, their names etched deep into stone and memory. Yet beneath the grandeur lay fractures, invisible at first, like cracks beneath lacquer, but spreading quietly through court and countryside alike. Factions whispered in shadowed halls, old loyalties bending like fragile bamboo in the wind. The land was rich in culture and tradition, a tapestry woven with silk threads of philosophy, art, and religion, yet the heartbeat of its governance faltered, pulsing unevenly beneath the surface. Corruption seeped through the veins of power, ministers swayed by greed, soldiers hungry for spoils, while common people toiled in the fields, their voices muffled beneath the clamor of privilege. To inherit such an empire was both blessing and burden. It was a realm that demanded reverence, yet begged for renewal, a kingdom both majestic and fragile, poised on the precipice between glory and collapse. She saw this empire not as an inheritance to preserve unchanged, but as a living thing in need of care, a garden overgrown with weeds that required a gardener's hand. Her vision was clear: to mend the cracks, to heal with reform rather than force. Her predecessors had ruled with rigid tradition, clinging to the past as a shield against chaos. But she understood that survival meant change, and so she began to reshape the empire's soul. One decree, one reform, one cautious step at a time. It was a delicate dance, balancing respect for ancient customs with the boldness to challenge what no one else dared touch. In this tightrope walk, she gathered allies, scholars who whispered new ideas in her ear, officials willing to dream of a different future. The empire's many faces fascinated her, from the bustling marketplaces humming with merchants to the silent temples where monks chanted prayers, from the rural villages under starlit skies to the grand palaces where power was negotiated in whispers. She listened to the empire's many voices, learning that true rule meant understanding the whole, not just the throne room's gilded walls. And in this listening she found both strength and purpose. But ruling such a vast realm was no gentle task. Rebellions flickered like sparks on dry grass, foreign threats lurked beyond the mountains, and every decision risked unleashing storms. Still, she held the empire steady, guiding it through peril with wisdom and resolve. Each law passed was a stitch in a fragile tapestry. Each alliance formed a thread binding together fractured lands. And yet, even as she labored to hold her empire whole, the world beyond the palace gates grew uneasy. Old powers whispered against her rise, scribes debated how to tell her story, and the shadows lengthened over her reign. Tonight, as we breathe in the quiet of this ancient world, let us imagine the weight she carried, not just of crown and scepter, but of a sprawling, restless empire that looked to her for hope and healing. The empire she inherited was not perfect, but in her hands it began to dream of a new dawn. And though the pages of history would try to forget her, the empire itself remembered. Like rivers carving stone over centuries, her influence flowed quietly beneath the surface, shaping the land in ways invisible but eternal. And now, as we close our eyes, may we hold this vision softly in our hearts, an empire vast, fragile, and waiting for a leader brave enough to inherit it whole. In the grand theater of empire, titles are the costumes worn by those who command. They speak of power, of rank, of legacy, yet sometimes they cloak more than they reveal, a veil drawn to soften the sharp edges of authority. She bore many names, each chosen with care, not to celebrate her rule, but to disguise it. Empress Dowager, Regent, Consort. Words that danced around the truth like mist over a mountain lake. The world was not ready, it seemed, to name a woman simply as emperor. So her power wore the robes of others, borrowed from the men she eclipsed. But behind each softened title lay a fierce truth. She held the reins of an empire. Her voice carried the weight of law, and her will shaped the course of history. Titles, after all, are stories. Stories told by those who write history, and those stories can hide revolutions in plain sight. To the court, she was often called Dowager, a word that suggested a quiet guardian of legacy, a figurehead waiting in the wings. Yet she was the director of the stage itself. The scribes and scholars who chronicled her reign carefully avoided words that might scandalize tradition. Acting in the emperor's name, they wrote. Steward of the throne, they whispered. Never the full truth, and so the veil thickened. a curtain drawn over her achievements, an unspoken rule that power must wear a man's face. But she did not retreat behind these titles. She stepped forward within their shadows, turning what was meant as limitation into a mantle of unseen authority. Her decrees carried the seal of the empire. Her decisions altered the fate of millions. Yet when history was penned, her name was wrapped in hesitation. Even today, her titles confuse scholars. Was she ruler or regent, sovereign or servant? The lines blur like ink on parchment, smudged by those who feared a woman's power. This veil of titles was a silent rebellion in itself, a story told by omission, by carefully placed words, by the soft power of suggestion. Yet, in the quiet corners of the court, she was no shadow. She was a force. Her presence undeniable, her rule uncompromising. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, consider the power of names, how they can hide and how they can reveal, how a title can be a cage or a crown. She wore many titles, but none could contain the emperor within, and in this gentle paradox lies the secret of her reign, a throne held not just by name, but by will. The court was a place of masks and murmurs, of measured smiles and guarded glances. In its gilded halls loyalty was currency, but truth a rare and fragile treasure. She walked among these wary watchers, a ruler not always embraced, but never ignored. Some feared the quiet strength behind her gaze, others admired it in secret. Yet many hesitated to speak her name aloud. Courtiers balanced their roles like dancers on a knife's edge, navigating favor and fear with equal care. Their pens hesitated when recording her reign. Their voices softened when speaking of her power, for to acknowledge her fully was to challenge a world built on centuries of tradition. And tradition in the court was an unyielding force, like the ancient walls themselves, rooted deep and slow to bend. Some courtiers whispered tales of awe, of an empress who commanded storms with a glance, who tamed rebellious generals with a word. But these whispers were tucked behind doors, never inked in official records. Others wove stories of caution, painting her as ruthless, unyielding, a woman who upset the natural order, and whose ambition knew no bounds. In the chambers where history was written, she was both myth and mystery, a ruler who lived in the space between fact and legend. Yet beneath the hesitation lay something profound. Even those reluctant to witness her reign could not deny its impact. Her influence reached every corner of the palace, in the policies enacted, in the reforms debated, in the very air that carried the scent of incense and power. There was a quiet respect, hidden beneath the surface, a recognition that she was not merely a figurehead, but a force that shaped the empire's fate. And so the court became a paradox, both guardian of tradition and reluctant chronicler of a woman who defied it. As we settle into the stillness of night, let us listen to the echoes of those hesitant voices, their silence, their whispers, their guarded awe. For in their reluctance lies the fragile truth of a reign that history tried to soften but could not erase. And as sleep begins to fold around you, know that even shadows can cast light, and that the most reluctant witnesses sometimes bear the clearest testimony. No ruler can command every word written in their name. No emperor holds the brush that paints all portraits. And so, even as she governed with strength and vision, the stories told about her twisted in ways she could not prevent. History is not written by the powerful alone, but also by those who survive after them, by scribes, scholars, rivals, and the hands of time. And in this delicate balance her narrative became a battleground. The ink that once recorded her decrees was sometimes dipped in suspicion. Her achievements were recast as ambition's folly, her wisdom questioned, her intentions misread. They called her ruthless, an epithet for power and a woman's voice. They labeled her unyielding, unmotherly, unnatural words meant to dim her light and sow doubt. The qualities praised in men became reasons to vilify her. Her image was reshaped by those who feared her legacy. Portraits altered to soften her, gaze or harden her expression, sometimes turning a sovereign into a shadow, a tyrant into a cautionary tale dot in court chronicles. Her reign was described with hesitance, details omitted or skewed, selective memory shaping a story convenient for the victors. Pages were rewritten, lines erased, as if history itself was edited to suit a narrative of discomfort. But no matter how they tried to control the script, truth seeped through the cracks. In private letters, forgotten poems, whispered gossip, the echoes of a ruler who defied expectations persisted. She was a tempest in a world that demanded calm, a force uncontained by the narrow roles assigned to women. And the more she broke molds, the louder the backlash became. Yet, in the soft light of centuries, the distortions themselves tell a story. Of power that unsettled, of a reign too bold to be comfortably confined dot to night as you breathe slowly. Think of the stories we inherit, not just what is told, but what is hidden, reshaped, or silenced. In the shadows of the scripts she could not control, her true self still lingers, waiting to be discovered, and perhaps, in our quiet remembrance, we become the scribes of a truer tale, one that honors the woman behind the titles, the emperor. Beyond the veil, when an emperor passes, the pen begins its quiet work. What is remembered, and what is forgotten, is not chosen by fate, but by those left behind with ink in their hands. Her erasure did not begin with rebellion or foreign war. It began with scholars in dimly lit chambers, with advisers who feared her precedent, and with rulers who inherited the kingdom she held together, yet not the courage to say her name. History in those times was not a mirror. It was a canvas repainted by each dynasty that followed, and her image, once central, was slowly brushed over, not all at once, but piece by piece. The first to turn away were the court historians tasked with preserving imperial memory, but bound by tradition older than truth. How, they wondered, could they praise a woman who had ruled as a man? They could not reconcile the scrolls with their scripts, so they rewrote the scrolls. They replaced her reign with vague transitions. They called her a regent long after she had taken the throne. They moved her name from center to margin and from margin to absence. Later emperors, eager to affirm their own authority, saw danger in the story of a woman who had ruled alone. Her legacy became a threat to their control, a reminder that the throne had once bent to a voice not their own dot, so they made it disappear. Temples she restored were renamed. Statues with her likeness were defaced, the delicate curve of her face chipped away until the marble no longer spoke her name. Even in death, she was denied the honors she had earned. Buried as an empress, but not as an emperor. Her tomb, though magnificent, was marked with caution, as if admitting her greatness would cast too long a shadow. And yet The architects of her erasure could not fully succeed, because they left behind inconsistencies, footprints in the dust of altered scrolls, echoes in the imperial record. Where one historian removed her name, another left a hint. Where one emperor silenced her, a poet mourned her absence in verse. Over time, the attempt to erase her became a story in itself, a silence too loud to ignore Dot, and so tonight, let us linger in that silence, not as a void, but as a space where truth still breathes. Think of the hands that changed her story, not with malice alone, but with fear, tradition, and the ache of insecurity. They did not erase her because she failed. They erased her because she dared to succeed in a form the world could not yet accept. And now, in this gentle hour of remembering, we undo their work, one word at a time. We hold her legacy in the stillness. We name what was left unnamed, because no empire is eternal. But truth, once whispered, can outlive kings. The architects of her erasure worked with care, but they overlooked one thing. Though names may fade, deeds remain, and she, the sovereign they sought to forget, did not leave behind only scrolls and portraits. She left behind laws, structures, changes that endured long after her voice was silenced. While emperors before her chased glory through conquest, she pursued something more subtle, stability. She reformed taxation, easing burdens that had crushed farmers for generations. Her decrees were not just signatures, they were lifelines, carving space for equity in a system that had long favored the few. She rebuilt bureaucratic exams, once corrupted by bribery and favor, restoring merit where money had ruled. In doing so, she opened paths for scholars of humble origin to rise through ranks previously sealed by blood and privilege. These reforms, quiet as wind through bamboo, redefined the empire's rhythm, and though her name was scratched from the scrolls, the rhythm remained. Ministers under later emperors still followed the systems she designed. They governed with tools she sharpened, issued orders from the foundations she poured. Few dared speak her name, yet all walked on roads she paved. And it wasn't only governance she shaped. She reached into the sacred, bringing religious tolerance. Where persecution had brewed, temples were reopened. Sectarian flames cooled. Monks and philosophers found protection. Under the canopy of her vision, she understood the fragility of belief, how easily it could be used to divide. And she used her power not to dominate faith, but to shelter it. Even diplomacy bore her mark. She forged peaceful ties with distant kingdoms, favoring trade and trust over endless war. For a time the empire breathed easier. And that breath, though forgotten by history's louder voices, still lingers tonight. As you lie still, imagine those laws like constellations, not the brightest stars in the sky, but the ones that do not flicker, the ones that remain. She may not be named in the textbooks, but her decisions live on, woven into the quiet machinery that kept the empire turning. And isn't that a form of immortality? To be remembered not in statues, but in systems, not in epic poems, but in daily life. In harvests made fairer, in exams passed by the deserving, in temples kept open to all. She was forgotten, yes. But her laws refused to forget her. So sleep now, knowing that justice has roots deeper than memory, and that some rulers shape the world, in ways the world doesn't realize until centuries later. Empires may crumble, scrolls may fade, names may be swallowed by silence, but stone remembers in the heart of the old capital, where imperial gardens once bloomed with silence and secrets. There remain pillars still bearing the marks of her hand, not obvious, not declared, but carved in gestures, alignments, and sacred symmetry. When she ruled, she built not only palaces and halls of judgment, but temples, observatories, and towers of learning, places where stone spoke to the stars and knowledge was housed in walls as much as in words. Some monuments she raised bore no inscription of her name, a deliberate anonymity, or perhaps a protection, as if she knew history might turn cruel, and sought to leave behind something it could not so easily erase. In statues now attributed to others, scholars have noticed details out of place. A hand poised in a gesture associated only with her court, a robe that matches her ceremonial patterns, a face too androgynous, too balanced, as though made to survive both reverence and removal. And then there are the temple tablets, large, stone steely, etched with imperial blessings. On several her name is missing, yet the date matches her reign. The brush style reflects her era, and the blessings are hers. As centuries passed, later rulers defaced some of these relics. They ordered chisel and hammer to reassign credit, to rebrand history as they needed it. But erasure leaves scars, and the scars remain, a worn-out line where a title once stood, a face recarved, just slightly misaligned, a mismatch in script that whispers of revision. And so, beneath the surface of these ancient structures lies a quiet rebellion. The stones refused to lie completely. Architects, artisans, and monks, many of them likely knew her truth. Some, perhaps in subtle resistance, left behind hidden tributes. A phoenix engraved where only dragons should appear. A series of roof tiles etched with a cipher of her name. A stairway alignment that points not north, but to the direction of her birthplace. Symbols, signs, shadows, the quiet vocabulary of memory. When speech was forbidden. It is said that during a rare eclipse centuries later, the light fell just so upon a temple wall, revealing a hidden inscription long buried beneath paint and moss. Her name, faint but intact, and with it a phrase, the one who ruled beyond permission. Tonight, as you rest beneath your own ceiling, imagine these quiet monuments scattered across a sleeping empire. Not grand, not loud, but eternal. Let your mind drift over time-smoothed steps, past walls that once echoed her voice, through corridors now empty but still humming with the memory of her stride. Because in the end, she became not just a person, but a pattern. A geometry in governance, a balance in law, a harmony in stone. And while the world tried to rewrite her, stone never forgot. And neither will we. History often speaks in echoes, whispers carried on the wind through the corridors of time. Though her name was silenced in official scrolls, in quieter places her story lingered, soft as a breath, persistent as the stars. In village fireside tales, grandmothers spoke of a woman who wore the emperor's robes, who commanded respect with a calm voice, and whose wisdom saved the land from ruin. Stories embroidered by memory, carried forward by those who dared to remember. Poets wrote verses cloaked in metaphor, painting a sovereign as a mighty phoenix, rising, blazing, then disappearing into smoke, leaving behind only feathers for the faithful to find. Though the words never named her, the spirit behind the lines was unmistakable. Monks in remote temples chanted prayers for an emperor unknown to most, a protector of the people, a guardian against the shadows that stalked the throne. Their hymns, passed down through generations, kept alive a presence that history tried to erase. Even within the imperial family, some dared to keep her memory alive in secret journals, in coded letters, and whispered conversations. These fragments, hidden and fragile, formed a mosaic of truth beneath the polished surface. This quiet resistance was a testament to the power of remembrance. Though the world sought to forget her, her legacy lived in the small, sacred spaces where truth is safest dot across distant provinces, in marketplaces and mountain villages. Her name transformed into legend, a symbol of strength and resilience for those who felt unseen. She became a beacon not of imperial might, but of hope for the overlooked and underestimated. Tonight, as the night air cools and your eyelids grow heavy, let your mind listen to these whispers, the soft voices from ages past, faint but unbroken. For history is not just what is written in grand books, but what is breathed in stories told under stars, passed from heart to heart. And in these whispers, she is still present, alive in the quiet breath of time, waiting to be heard anew. Centuries after her reign had slipped into shadows, a quiet scholar lost in dusty scrolls and fading manuscripts began to notice something strange. Fragments that did not fit the accepted narrative, margins scrawled with names once thought erased, whispers of a ruler whose story was waiting to be reclaimed. This scholar, with gentle hands and patient eyes, traced the faintest lines of truth beneath layers of omission. With every scroll unrolled, every forgotten text examined, a portrait emerged not as myth but as flesh and will. A woman who had shaped an empire with quiet ferocity. She had been hidden, but never truly gone. Her legacy waited in the margins, in the code of laws still in use, in the stones that bore silent witness, in the poems that spoke in riddles. This rediscovery was no sudden blaze, but a slow-burning dawn, a patient unearthing of the past's buried treasures, and the courage to question what had been accepted for so long. The scholar's work became a quiet revolution, a reclamation of memory through careful truth-telling. Each discovery a soft beacon illuminating the silhouette of a ruler lost at time's neglect. Books once closed to her name began to open. Histories rewritten with a more honest pen. And slowly the whispers of her story grew louder, echoing from libraries to lecture halls, from whispered academic debates to the gentle retellings by storytellers and dreamers. Yet this rediscovery was also a reminder of the fragility of history, how easily stories can be bent, broken, or buried, and how precious it is to listen deeply to the voices that persist beneath the noise. Tonight, as you drift in sleep's soft embrace, let your thoughts rest with this scholar's quiet courage, a reminder that even the most hidden truths can be found again, if one only looks patiently and listens with an open heart, because sometimes the past is not lost. It waits for us, waiting for the gentle hands that will bring it back to light. In the heart of the palace, there once stood a mirror, tall polished bronze, framed in lacquered wood, positioned not far from the dragon throne itself. a simple object by design, but in her reign it became something more. Each morning before court, she is said to have stood before it, not in vanity but in ritual, to reflect not just her face but her place, a woman in a man's empire, a sovereign in a world uncertain how to name her, and a ruler who had chosen to govern with poise, even as tradition trembled. In the mirror's polished surface, she would see not only the robes of power, but the cost of wearing them, the loneliness that comes with rule, the silence that surrounds a throne. But she did not look away. Some said she spoke softly to the mirror, whispering decisions before announcing them to the court, a moment of clarity in a life of constant calculation. Others said she gazed into it to remember herself, the girl she had been, the monarch she had become, and the legacy she might leave behind. The mirror reflected all of it, the weight of the crown, the wisdom of years, and the quiet question that lingers in every ruler's eyes: was it worth it? Yet it also reflected something greater, a truth that could not be erased, that she had stood there, fully sovereign, fully aware. When later rulers claimed her legacy, the mirror remained, but its stories were silenced, no longer spoken of, no longer visited in ceremony, only polished by servants who did not know whose. Reflection once held its gaze so firmly, yet mirrors, like history, remember. They do not choose who stands before them, but they hold the image just the same. Today, that mirror may be gone, melted, lost, perhaps hidden, but in stories it still stands, a symbol of unflinching presence, a power born with grace and reflected in stillness. As you rest tonight, imagine that mirror before you, and in it see not only her, but yourself, for within its frame lies a question gently whispered across time. What do we carry when no one believes we should? And who do we become when we dare to look fully, honestly, at what we are meant to be? She looked, and ruled, and never blinked. In the dim galleries of an old archive, where parchment sleeps beneath layers of dust, and paintings hide behind cracked silk curtains, there remains one portrait, faded, worn, and almost forgotten, that bears the likeness of a sovereign no longer named. It is not labeled. There is no golden plaque, no flourish of imperial titles carved in jade. Only a face calm, composed, and strangely alive, with eyes that seem to know they have been painted to outlast silence. For centuries, this painting sat in obscurity, misattributed, mislabeled, misfiled. A woman, perhaps a consort, perhaps a noble no one knew for certain, or so they said. But then came the scholars, the quiet seekers of forgotten truth, and with them came questions. Why was the pose so stately? Why the imperial robe stitched with dragons? Why the background an unmistakable hall where only emperors once stood? The brushwork matched no other known portrait, delicate yet powerful, a composition that neither flattered nor diminished. It simply declared, and it was in the gaze, that unblinking, measured gaze, that the truth became clear. This was not a portrait of someone beside the throne. This was someone on it. Perhaps it was painted in secret by an artist bold enough to capture her, yet wise enough to sign no name. Perhaps it was commissioned during her reign, before the tides of history turned. We may never know who held the brush, but the paint tells its own story, unlike later images of her, where she was softened, aged, made diminutive. This face is direct, neither cruel nor kind. But, sovereign Dot, it is not a portrait that pleads for admiration. It is a portrait that states, simply and irrevocably, I was here. Some say it was hidden in the palace walls during the first wave of her erasure. Others believe it was smuggled out by loyalists, passed down in secret until the dynasty's dust had settled Dot. However it survived, it did Dot, and now it hangs quietly, without fanfare, in a corner few notice. But for those who do, the air around it shifts Dot. It is not grand, it is not large, but it holds weight, like a key in the hand, like the last breath before truth is spoken. Tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine standing before that portrait. Feel her gaze meeting yours across the centuries. No bitterness, no pride, no fear, just presence. And in that stillness, hear the quiet message that history tried to erase. They may forget my name, but not my face, not what I built, not what I endured, and not who I was. She is still watching, and we at last are beginning to see her. There was a garden she loved more than all the others, tucked behind a lacquered gate and shaded by ancient cypress trees. It was not the grandest, nor the most adorned, but it was quiet, and in that quiet she found reflection. Winter was its most sacred season, when the ponds froze over with a thin skin of ice, when the peonies bowed under the weight of snow, when no courtiers lingered on the stone paths. That was when she walked there, alone. The plum trees were her favorite. Their blossoms defied the cold, looming amid frost, delicate yet unyielding. A contradiction she understood well. She walked slowly between the sleeping branches, her footsteps soft on snow-dusted stone. Here she did not wear her crown. Here she was not the disputed monarch, the erased sovereign, the woman who dared to rule Dot. She was simply herself, Dot in winter. The empire felt smaller, more contained, more personal. Its noise softened, its demands held at a distance. The garden was her pause between edicts and uprisings, between reforms and resistance. Dot, it is said that she wrote poetry in these walks, lines not meant for publication, but for memory, for the wind, for the trees. One such verse barely preserved. In the notes of a monk reads, "Let others seek springtime in bloom. I find peace where nothing grows. Beneath frost the root remains. Even silence remembers the flower." She knew winter was not absence, but preparation, a pause before renewal. And perhaps that is how she saw herself, not as a burst of history, but as a season between seasons, a time when the old ways froze and something quietly, slowly changed beneath. Years later, when her name was forbidden, the garden remained. Though the emperor's emblem was removed from its gate, though her poems were scrubbed from the stone tablet beside the plum grove, the trees still bloomed, Dot, and they still bloom. Each winter, buds rise against the pale sky, as if in defiance of silence or in tribute to it. Visitors pass by the garden now, unknowing. They walk beneath branches that once heard her thoughts, beside ponds that once mirrored her face. But some pause. Perhaps they feel something, a stillness, a memory, a story not quite gone. Tonight, as you close your eyes, let that garden bloom. In your mind, breathe in the frost-kissed air. Step softly along those quiet paths. Feel the hush of snow beneath your feet, because even in winter something grows. Even when forgotten, something remains. Dot, and in the emperor's garden, where silence was her refuge, Time has not erased her dot. It has only made space for us to return. The empire she ruled was vast, but within its reach women moved in shadows and silence. Not all were queens or consorts, yet many bore quiet power, mothers, advisors, artisans, and servants who shaped daily life beyond the throne's gaze. Her reign stirred more than political change. It whispered to these women a secret song of possibility, a muted call to strength, to presence, to voice. Though she was often hidden in history's margins, her example was a beacon, not loud or violent, but steady and persistent, like a candle flickering in a dark room. Slowly, pushing back the night dot in homes and workshops, women spoke her name in hushed tones, passing stories from mother to daughter, legends of an emperor who had ruled with wisdom and resolve, who dared to walk paths no woman had walked before. These whispered memories were acts of rebellion, small and silent, but fierce in their persistence. They defied the erasure imposed by those who feared her power. Some women learned to wield influence quietly, navigating the complex dance of court life with subtlety and grace. Others found strength in craft and community, building networks of support beneath the surface of empire dot. In this silent rebellion, the seeds of change were planted. Roots grew deep, hidden from the eyes of those who would deny their strength. The empire's women, once invisible, began to imagine new possibilities for themselves, for their daughters, for the future dot. And though history may have forgotten, their names, their legacy endures in every whispered story, in every act of quiet courage, in every flame that refuses to be extinguished. Dot, tonight, as you drift toward sleep, think of those unseen hands and voices, the silent rebellion that shaped an empire from the shadows. For sometimes the strongest power is the one no one sees, quiet, patient, and endlessly enduring. Dot, in the heart of the ancient palace, beyond gilded doors and watchful guards, lies a library whispered about in court circles, a place of knowledge both revered and feared. It is said to hold scrolls that never saw the light of public eyes, records of emperors and empresses, of decisions unspoken and histories rewritten. Among these hidden tomes, there are rumors of writings that mention her reign, pages carefully folded, texts carefully veiled, stories too dangerous to be read. Aloud. The Forbidden Library, as it came to be known, was a vault of power and secrecy. Knowledge was a weapon, and only the trusted few held the keys. Some say that within these silent shelves her true legacy was preserved, unedited, unapologetic, and alive. Words that revealed the full breadth of her rule, her reforms, her challenges, and the quiet strength that defied erasure. But the library's existence was perilous. Guardians of tradition patrolled its halls, destroying what threatened the accepted narrative. Scrolls vanished overnight. Pages disappeared into shadow. Yet even in the face of such censorship, fragments survived, hidden in ciphers encoded in poems or carved into the edges of manuscripts. The Forbidden Library became a symbol of resistance, of memory preserved in silence, of truth hidden but not lost. And those who sought knowledge there did so with reverence and risk, knowing that to uncover her story fully was to challenge the very foundations of power. Tonight, as you settle into the calm of night, imagine walking softly through these shadowed stacks, touching the worn spines of forgotten books, listening to the silent stories they hold. For history's secrets are not always in the light. Sometimes they dwell in shadows, waiting for the patient and the brave God, and in the quiet of your dreams may you hear the whispers from that forbidden place, echoes of a reign that time could not fully erase. An empire is not built in moments, but in quiet waves of change, invisible to the hurried eye, yet shaping the future like a patient sculptor. During her reign, while the court debated and the historians hesitated, the very fabric of the empire shifted. Thread by thread, law by law, custom by custom, her reforms subtle but profound, rippling through the bureaucracy, reshaping governance from the ground up. Tax codes rewritten, examinations refined, justice tempered by fairness. These transformations did not shout, they whispered. Like a stream carving stone, they slowly changed the shape of power. The people, often unseen in grand histories, felt these shifts in their daily lives. Farmers burdened less by taxes, scholars rising by merit, merchants trading in safer markets. Yet the empire's heart beat with contradiction. Change stirred fear among the old guard, who clung to traditions. Like lifelines, resistance bubbled beneath the surface, unseen but persistent. Still, she pressed forward, not with the arrogance of conquest, but with the quiet conviction of necessity. In cities and villages, in the homes of common folk, the empire's transformation unfolded, not in grand ceremonies, but in the steady rhythm of improved lives. Her reign was a bridge between what had been and what could be, a time when an empire, though reluctant, began to listen, to adapt, to grow. Tonight, as you settle into stillness, imagine this slow transformation, the gentle unfolding of a new era, carried not on trumpets, but on the soft footsteps of change. And as sleep draws near, know that sometimes the most lasting revolutions are those felt quietly, beneath the surface, within the halls where knowledge is meant to thrive, where scholars gather to illuminate the past. There is a silence that echoes louder than any voice, a silence shaped by choice, by the weight of tradition, and the quiet fear of challenging the accepted tale. For centuries, the scholars who held pens and scrolls turned away from her story, leaving gaps in the records, blank spaces where her name should have been. It was not ignorance that caused this void, but deliberate omission, a silence that spoke volumes, a careful erasure wrapped in academic restraint. Some historians whispered in private chambers, acknowledging her impact with cautious words, but feared to speak openly, for to name her fully was to invite controversy. The academy became a fortress, guarding the old narratives as if they were sacred scripture, and in that fortress her reign was relegated to footnotes, to contested passages, to questions marked with doubt. Yet this silence was not absolute. Fragments survived in lectures passed down quietly, in debates veiled by scholarly jargon, in the slow accumulation of evidence that could not be denied. The scholar's silence became a battleground between the need for truth and the chains of convention. And in this tension lies a subtle lesson, that history is shaped not only by those who write, but also by those who choose when to speak and when to remain quiet. Tonight, as you sink into sleep's embrace, let your mind rest with this quiet struggle, the silent resistance of scholars, and the fragile hope that knowledge, though delayed, still finds its way, For even in silence the past breathes, and someday those whispers become voices. As the centuries passed, her story flickered like a fragile candle in the wind, dimmed by forces that sought to snuff it out, yet never fully extinguished. Her legacy lived on, not in grand monuments or loud proclamations, but in the quiet corners of the empire's soul, and laws that shaped fairness, in whispered stories told by firelight, in the soft bloom of plum trees that defied winter's grasp. Each generation that remembered, even in silence or shadow, carried a spark. A last light passed quietly from hand to hand. This light was fragile, but resilient, a testament to a ruler who ruled beyond permission, a woman who forged her own path, and a world not yet ready to see her. Though history tried to rewrite her name, the essence of her reign remained, a balance of strength and grace, of courage and compassion, of vision and quiet rebellion. And now, as you rest beneath the quiet sky, her legacy can be yours to hold, not as a tale of loss, but as a story of endurance, of truth whispered softly across time. Let this last light guide you into sleep, a gentle flame in the dark, a reminder that even the faintest glow can illuminate the night. And in the stillness, know that some legacies never fade. They simply wait for a new dawn. History is never truly lost. It sleeps beneath the surface, waiting for the moment to awaken. For some stories, the resurrection is quiet, a gentle unfolding rather than a sudden blaze. Her name, once erased, begins to rise again, carried on the lips of those who dare to question, who dare to look beyond what was written. Scholars revisit dusty archives, decipher faded scrolls, piece together fragments of a forgotten reign. Artists paint her anew, giving her face back to the world, with eyes clear and steady, full of untold stories. Writers spin tales not of myth, but of the woman who ruled with wisdom and will. Documentarians bring light to shadows, and storytellers share her legacy by firelight once more. Her resurrection is not one of grand parades, but of soft voices growing stronger, a chorus of remembrance that cannot be silenced, each telling a thread weaving her back into the fabric of history. This quiet resurrection is a promise that truth, no matter how deeply buried, can rise again. That the past, though rewritten, still holds the power to inspire. Tonight, as sleep enfolds you, let the image of her rising linger, not as a ghost of what was lost, but as a presence renewed, a beacon shining softly in the tapestry of time. For every erasure there is a return, and in that return there is hope. Across the vast expanse of time, between the rise and fall of empires, between the whispers of forgotten names, there are threads delicate and enduring that bind us all. Her story is one such thread, woven quietly into the tapestry of history, connecting past to present, the forgotten to the remembered. Those centuries have passed, her courage, her wisdom, her quiet rebellion still ripple through the lives we live today. We carry her legacy, not only in books or monuments, but in the choices we make, in the voices we lift, in the stories we choose to tell. Each act of remembrance is a stitch, binding us closer to the truths once hidden, to the lessons learned in shadows, to the strength born from silence. This thread invites us to see ourselves as part of a larger story, one that includes those erased, those forgotten, those who ruled beyond permission. It reminds us that history is not fixed, but living, breathing, always weaving new patterns. Tonight, as you close your eyes, feel the gentle pull of these threads, a connection to the past, a link to the future, and in that quiet joining, know that you are part of something vast, something timeless, something beautiful. For the story of the first female emperor and the empire she shaped is not just hers alone. It is ours. As night deepens and stars scatter across the velvet sky, our minds drift into realms where history and dreams entwine. It is here, in the quiet sanctuary of sleep, that her story finds a new life, not bound by the limits of ink or stone, but free to bloom in the imagination's gentle embrace. She becomes more than a name on forgotten scrolls, more than a shadow erased by time. She walks in gardens of moonlight, her steps soft as falling petals, her voice a lullaby woven through the night air. In dreams, her reign unfolds anew, a tapestry of courage and grace, of quiet strength and gentle power, of wisdom that bends, but does not break. She is the empress who rules not by decree alone, but by the warmth of presence, by the echo of kindness in the halls of power. A figure both distant and near, a memory shaped by the heart. And in this realm of dreams where time flows like a slow river, her legacy is unbound, no longer confined by the erasures of history, but alive in the stories we carry within. Tonight, as you surrender to sleep's embrace, let her story drift through your mind, a soft current beneath the surface, a gentle flame glowing in the dark. For in the realm of dreams we reclaim what was lost, we honor what was hidden, and we carry forward the light of those who came before. So rest now, cradled by the echoes of an ancient reign, and know that in your dreams she lives again. Memory is a gentle force, not always loud or insistent, but persistent, a river carving its way through stone, shaping the landscape of who we are. Her memory, once submerged beneath tides of silence, now rises slowly, a soft current beneath the roar of history. It moves through whispers and stories, through hidden symbols and quiet acts of remembrance. This power of memory is not owned by monuments, nor confined to grand histories, but lives in the hearts of those who choose to remember. In the poems softly spoken, in the lessons quietly taught, in the courage to tell stories that others try to erase. Memory is rebellion, and healing, and connection. It binds the past to the present, the forgotten to the seen, the erased to the known. In her story we find this truth, that even when the world turns away, memory remains a steadfast light, a beacon that no darkness can fully consume. Tonight, as you rest in the hush of night, let memory be your companion, a quiet power holding you gently, guiding you through the folds of time. And as sleep deepens, know that the stories we hold dear are threads in the vast tapestry of existence. Fragile, yes, but infinitely strong, for memory is where we begin again. As the first light of dawn filters softly through ancient trees, a new day rises over the landscape of forgotten histories. The story of the first female emperor, once lost in shadows and silence, begins to unfold anew, bathed in the gentle glow of rediscovery. Historians, poets, and dreamers alike step into the light of understanding, piecing together fragments that time and erasure could not fully consume. Their voices join in quiet chorus, bringing clarity to the blurred edges of her tale. the empire she shaped with laws, gardens, and quiet revolutions, no longer hidden beneath layers of doubt. Her legacy is reawakened, not as myth or whisper, but as a living thread woven into the fabric of history. This dawn is not a sudden blaze, but a gradual light, slow and steady, filling the corners once darkened by neglect. And with this light comes a gentle invitation to look back with new eyes, to honor the complexity of those who ruled beyond permission, to listen to the stories waiting patiently to be told. Tonight, as you close your eyes and drift toward sleep, let the dawn of rediscovery warm your thoughts, a reminder that even the longest night is followed by morning, and that the past, no matter how hidden, always waits for the day. So rest now, held in the quiet promise of new beginnings, and dream of the stories yet to be uncovered, the truth waiting patiently for us to find them.